If I was going to, though, make a statement on 10 years from now, maybe the thing I'm going to say is that designers did not spend enough time understanding the business that they were in. So, and I'll unpack that. If you don't understand the business that your company is in, what does it do? How does it sell? What is the go-to-market motion? How do you fucking make money? Which down the stream is like, how do you get paid? You get paid because a bunch of things end up being true and the product does what it's purported to do and the people using it get benefit out of it. But if designers don't understand the business, how the business operates, how we charge for things, like the disconnect between that and the like desire to just focus on the user experience is one of the things that I think is a giant gap. I just think it's one of the biggest gaps that there is in the design field right now.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Supra Insider podcast. This was a very special episode today where Marc and I sat down with Josh Brewer, who used to be my boss at Abstract. When I joined Abstract, it was about 50 people, Series B company. I was one of their very first power users who was a product manager. It was a design collaboration workflow software, which we'll talk about more in the episode. But Josh is a fantastic person. His just authenticity and openness are some of the things that drew me to Abstract in the first place. And I think you'll get a feel for that in this conversation. So I think you'll enjoy hearing his thought process. We covered things like building teams and incentivizing and attracting great talent to do their best work. We also went deep on Josh's thoughts on delegation and also founder mode, which is a very hot topic in the zeitgeist right now. We talked about the way that Josh thinks about delivering feedback and receiving feedback. And we went pretty deep on Josh's thoughts on what AI means for the future of design. So for those reasons, and even a few more topics, which you'll uncover when you get into the episode, I think this is one of my favorite conversations we've had, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Josh, it's so good to have you on the podcast, and it's so good to see you after a few years where we didn't have a chance to be on calls together, but thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's really good to see your face again. And Marc, it's wonderful to get some time to get to know you and talk about all things product and startups.
I'm excited.
Yeah, Josh, the place I wanted to start is we've had Heather Phillips on the podcast. We've had Not You on the podcast. There's a bunch of other incredible people that worked at Abstract, which is the company where you're the founder CEO, that we haven't had on the podcast yet, but it's an honor to have you on. And I think the place I wanted to start is, what was it about Abstract, what you were doing there, that just attracted some of the most incredible people that I've ever worked with?
That is a fantastic question. I appreciate that one. When I think about what made Abstract unique or special, I think I have to trace the roots of it back to my experience at Twitter. I was really fortunate to be there during hyperscaling, right? A couple hundred to over 2,000 people in 3 years. And that's still to this day, every time I say it out loud, I'm like, wow, we did that? Okay. And I learned a lot. Like, I always joked that it was like my MBA and my master's and my PhD all shoved into one 3-year period. And there's a lot of folks that I learned a lot from. And then there's a lot of things that I took as, what not to do. There were plenty of counterproductive examples as well. And when I left Twitter, I left to start an incubator. It was called Habitat. And my whole thesis behind it was, there are really talented designers and really talented engineers out there. And I kept having these conversations around an engineer or a designer, it doesn't matter, would reach out and be like, I've got this idea. I need a co-founder and like a design co-founder, but I don't know how to find that person. And then I'm not sure how to get money. Like, I have a few connections, so I think I could sort of navigate it, but it was fuzzy for them, right? They had some drive and desire and some vision for something that they wanted to work on, but they didn't understand the whole picture. And this kept happening. And I was like, okay, what if you created a space where these kinds of people can come together and they can explore in constraint-based, hypothesis-driven experiments? And we can build a lot of shit. And at the same time, solve the founder dating problem, allow people to get to know each other, figure out strengths and weaknesses. One of the things at Habitat I came up with was, first and foremost, no assholes. That was the first principle and the number one guiding policy was no assholes. The second was a phrase
By
that
the way, one quick question there. How do you
yeah,
filter for assholes?
okay. The like very off the cuff answer is you can tell pretty quickly in conversation. Are they deeply centered on themselves? Do they talk over other people? Do they challenge in a way that isn't inviting the other person into the conversation? Are they belittling? Are they trying to position themselves in a way that causes others to be lower than, put down, and energy? Like, how do they show up in the room? Do they show up and take up all the fucking space and need to be the one talking all the time? Or are they aware of other people? Do they make space for others? Right. Those are some of the things that, like, right off the top, I never wrote the heuristics on that, but I think we did a pretty good job.
definition.
Yeah.
I think I buy into that definition.
Okay.
I think you carried that forward. I think when I think about the abstract team, which I know we're jumping ahead a little in the story, but I think that that value, at least for sure, continued into the abstract team.
I think so too. And the other one was a phrase, we hire grownups. And grownups had nothing to do with age. It was all about, can you manage yourself? Do you know how to show up and be responsible for your commitments? Right? Are you willing? Right? Is there like a willingness to engage? Is there a curiosity? Is there, yeah, like, I don't need to babysit you. I don't need to constantly be checking in and micromanaging everything that you do. So I think implied piece in there is like high trust and high agency end up being really critical to qualities of the humans that you're bringing into an environment like that. Abstract and another company called Awesome both spun out of Habitat, closed it down so that I could go run Abstract. And at Abstract, when we started, it was actually at Habitat, one of the most interesting moments was Kevin Smith, who was my technical co-founder, had a working prototype of the product. And I invited Tim Van Dam to come to our office so I could show it to him. And at the end of the demo, Tim pushes back from his desk and looks at me and says, "Are you hiring?" And we hadn't incorporated the business yet. We hadn't raised money for it yet. Like, we literally just had the tech demo that Kevin had done like days before.
For people listening who might not know who Tim Van Dam is, some context is recently Lenny Richiski interviewed Dylan Field at Config, which is Figma's conference. And on stage, there were two names of designers that Dylan dropped as the people who arguably influenced the direction of Figma the most as early kind of community members. One of them was Tim Van Dam, who now works at Figma as a principal designer. And Tim also worked with us at Abstract, which is also jumping ahead a little. Second person is Payam Rajabi, who was my primary design partner when I joined Abstract as well. So the caliber of designer that Dylan considers to be people who he looks up to for their feedback are the kinds of people that we're talking about. So I just wanted to take that little tangent, but please continue, Josh.
Yeah, both of them are incredible designers in their own right and really, really good human beings as well. And I think that's another piece of this story. So Tim and I have that interaction and I walk out and I'm like, I don't know, but let me figure it out, was the short response. And we got to spend 5 years together. And Tim and I'd known each other for a while before that, but to be in the mix together, to be pushing on ideas, to be able to bounce off of each other and like sharpen stuff and challenge each other in ways that were really healthy. And I think both of us grew tremendously in our relationship. I consider it one of the coolest things that came out of that whole journey. There was a lot of them, to be fair, but that one in particular was really special. And our first couple of engineers that we had on the team, really talented folks who came in and just literally just got to work. And we partnered, right? There wasn't silos of stuff. It was the team coming together. And if we're connecting this whole thread to how do you bring in the caliber of people, I think one of the things is you actually create a environment in which each person's contribution is actually not just necessary, but it's celebrated and it is built upon and it becomes foundational to the way that the organization is moving and the rhythm and cadence that it operates in. I think another key piece of it is I really think that really talented, smart people want to work on really cool shit. Like, they really do. And not just, oh, that's so cool. There's something of a mission that's bigger than just the actual product itself. It's the effect that thing has on the world. And we were really fortunate. We shifted the way that design was practiced for a while in a way that like I'm really proud of. I think what's come on in subsequent years with Figma and the multiplayer mode is something that like at that time not only seemed impossible, I think most people were like, I don't want that. Right. And then we got it and saw, oh, wow, there are some real benefits to this. There's trade-offs for sure. And there's still, still got a bit of a list of things I'm sad that we didn't make progress on. But coming back to this idea of like vision and purpose, and the people show up for that. They resonate with it. Something in their own internal compass says, yeah, that. I want to be a part of that. I want to contribute to that. I believe in the result of what is happening there. And there's a lot of people who also are like, I see dollar signs. So I don't want to make it all altruistic at all. If success is happening, everybody's hopeful that there's dollar signs that are attached to that. Even with that though, I think that a lot of what happened at Abstract was the combination of those different elements. Kevin and I think as leaders did our best to really set a standard for how we treated one another, how we treated each other, and then how we treated the rest of the organization. And we expected a lot of people. If I look back, I had pretty high expectations for everyone who was a part of that journey. And I was deeply grateful when people showed up and did above and beyond. And I don't know, maybe I'll pause there. That's some core foundational bits to this. I'm happy to go deeper if you want.
So I'm curious, to me, it makes so much sense why your design team was so strong, because, everyone probably had the empathy for that pain point. And I was like, I want to create that for myself and for everyone that I work with. And I know the impact that's going to have. Yeah. But I'm curious how, as a founder, do you think the engineers were also as attuned to that pain? And maybe if they weren't, like, what did you do as a founder to sell them on that vision and that narrative and make them feel like it mattered?
Yeah, that's a really great question because it wasn't just for design. So that is one of the beautiful things about Abstract. And I think the folks who really understood what we were trying to do, deeply understood. What we were trying to do was peel back the curtain, right? Open up the process and make it observable in a way that people could finally see how this stuff happens. How do we go from the CEO has an idea and told us to go make this happen to like a shipped product, right? Or at least to the designs that are ready to go be built, and then the process of shipping those things, because it always gets iterated on in the build process. And I had seen this over and over again, and I kept seeing it in the companies that were early in our private alpha. As soon as you gave all the other stakeholders, and the first order stakeholders are going to be engineers and product managers, right? Those are your partners. That three-legged stool, if you will, that's what makes or breaks your ability to really ship great products, is how well those teams are operating in cohesion. And to bring engineers earlier into the process was something in my career that worked incredibly well. It was something at Socialcast that I discovered. I was so fortunate. It was me and two engineers at the very beginning, and then two more. So like me and four engineers really. And they were so talented. And they were so curious about, hey, where are we at? What's going on? How can we be helpful? Sometimes it was like, I'm super early in a process and solving a problem that we're working on. And I'd send it over to them. And they'd be like, ooh, okay, that means I'm going to need to write a couple new APIs if we're going to go do it that way. If we do it this other way, we can use what we have. And that kind of a conversation for me is great. If those new APIs were actually valuable and would be a net benefit to what we were doing, I'm going to lean into that direction. If not, it means we can ship this thing like tomorrow. Then I might lean that way. Otherwise, in a normal process, it would have been a week later. We'd have some design review. Maybe an engineer's there, maybe they're not, right? It could end up way down the line. So you get the waterfall cascade of just like bullshit because the right people weren't close enough to the thing as it was happening. And so I took that through my whole time at Twitter, how we operated at Habitat. And then by watching company after company give us feedback, oh my God, my CEO now is, oh my God, I know what you're doing and I can start planning better. I can start pulling in other stakeholders sooner. If you're really using it to drive the workflow, everything went through it. So from the very earliest ideation and all the wild exploration to zooming in and saying, okay, we're shipping this. Oh, by the way, marketing needs to know. Oh, by the way, shit, nobody told sales that this is actually going to go out the door in 2 weeks. And all of a sudden, those stakeholders and folks that are part of it have a place that they could connect, they could participate, they could ask questions. And that wasn't just like we're trying to solve a problem for designers. It was like we're trying to shift the way that we work, the way that we develop and ship software. And so engineers were super excited about that, right? Like there were tools like Zeppelin for handoff at the time. And it was like, cool, great. But it's like this standalone thing. And so they were like, the more we can get these things into one place where we can reason about them. And it turns out we built it on Git for a reason. We wanted engineering and design to try to speak a similar language. We weren't as purists about everything. We really tried to adapt the core principles and the ideology behind it into something that made for a good workflow. But our product managers and our engineers were like, hell yes. Ben, you could probably speak to using abstract to design abstract to ship abstract.
Yeah, I was arguably Abstract's first PM power user, unless someone wants to claim that title. I'll assume I was maybe the first PM power user. In private alpha, when getting an invite to the product was like really cool. And people were like, can I get an invite? And I followed that whole journey from, it was probably like 10 of you in the office in the Mission sitting around, beautiful wooden office, when the product was still free. And you guys like, I wonder if people are going to pay us money for this, to the point where I watched you guys go out and raise the A, turn on monetization, raise the B. Then you're like, I think we need a PM. And then I was like, I would love to work on this product that I've been using as a power user. So I came because of that collaborative fabric, and my job was in a lot of ways to make the product better for non-designers and to increase the value for the other people that are involved in the workflow. So I learned so much about how teams build product in that process. So anyways, we could talk about that for forever. One thing I will say, just one of the things we wanted to talk about is how you work with a lot of founders. You've been a founder CEO. You've probably had CEOs or bosses that you've enjoyed working with more than or less than others. And there's an interesting discussion happening right now in the public discourse around ways that founders can really set up and run their teams to have the biggest possible impact. And the founder mode essay that Paul Graham wrote after a talk from Brian Chesky recently has been sparking an interesting discussion. And one thing I will say, just teeing this off, is I never felt like either you or Kevin came to me and told me what to do. I never felt like you dove in and overrode a decision that I made. I think you asked questions. You were always very curious, is one of the values, I think, of the team at Abstract. And I think you embodied those really well. And I think we executed, and I think we shipped a ton. And overall, I'd say we were a very high performing team, even though you guys did not behave. And so I just love to, maybe now that I've wound you up, set you free, would just love to hear what you might have to say about this discourse at the moment.
And Ben, maybe,
and Mark,
do you want to, or Josh, do you want to tee off a little bit like what founder mode is all about, in case someone hasn't heard about it, or what's the essence of it?
Yes. Paul Graham, Y Combinator fame, wrote an essay this month called Founder Mode and put it out. And it really, how much do I want to say? On one hand, it's, here's somebody like Paul advocating for founders, like doing the founder thing, being a founder, not like conforming to like CEO managerial processes. And you heard me put that funny voice on because I actually think some people try to embody that, and that's half of the problem. But for context, it's this idea that you're either, in Paul's essay, you're either in founder mode or you're not in founder mode. And founder mode is like deeply tactical. You're getting in everything. You're in the weeds. You've got opinions on everything. Hire the best people and let them do their thing, like delegation oriented, scaling management kind of school of thought. And he positions it as this binary thing. And I think one of my strongest reactions was like, I get where you're trying to go with this, Paul. And there's a founder, Josh, there's a part of me that's, and then there's a lot of me that's, man, it's not black and white. It's not either or. It's a spectrum. It's like everything, it's context dependent. So for Paul to make a statement like this and almost try to blanket the entire software creation industry, the whole tech industry, as there's only two modes. And basically, if you're in founder mode, you're badass and you're going to win. And if you're not in founder mode, you're probably going to fail. That was the other like subtext of that. And I just don't buy that either. There's too many examples where that's not necessarily true. I think the company's stage or kind of situation that they're in where rapid decision making and agility are critical leans more towards founder mode. Founder mode in my mind anyways, and I'm not Paul, I'm only reacting and responding to what I've read. But founder mode for me is you are involved. You are paying attention. And not like super high level checking in on things, but like actually aware of the pulse of what's happening in these things. Partly because you really fucking care. And that is one of the things about founder mode is you care, and you care deeply about the product. You care deeply about the customer experience. The people on the other side of the software that you are selling. What is this doing for them? Not just, oh, we've got a great value prop story we can tell. Like the actual impact to the human beings on the other side of it. If that's in the DNA, if that's in the air that company is breathing, I think founder mode is in operation. That doesn't necessarily mean you can only do that in small company size. And it also doesn't mean that like you won't benefit from having some structure and accountability, because the founder actually, in some of the examples that he used in there, and Brian Chesky and the guys at Airbnb, designer backgrounds from RISD, bring that energy. As a founder, you get all kinds of advice from people, all kinds of people, about how you should do things and how you shouldn't do things. And if it's your first rodeo, you're probably going to do more of the things they tell you than not until they end up breaking. And you're like, shit, I shouldn't have done that. Or you try it the way that it was given to you and it doesn't quite work. And if you're in founder mode, you're looking at the company as a system and as a product as well. You're like, oh, I'm doing this, but the output back is not what we were looking for. Oh, shit. In my mind, that's where having retrospectives, having a team that you can work with that can analyze like what's not working, and you treat your company as much like a product as you do your product. I think, again, to me, that's founder mode energy. The founder themselves usually has some unique perspective that it's the reason they're the founder. There's something in their experience, and I don't mean just like work experience, in the totality of their experience as a human, that gave them a unique perspective and insight on something. And that's the thing that I think if Paul's trying to, I don't know what Paul's trying to do. What I take out of that is like where companies lose that founder energy, I think are where either the founder ends up getting replaced and the person who comes in is literally a great operator, but they have no vision. They don't actually see the world the same way. And they arguably can't. Maybe they can get there, but they do not share that other person's perspective and unique life experience. And when that energy disappears out of the company, I think that's what contributes to the like non-founder mode, the management mode, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like it's missing that piece.
So if I hear it right, you don't think it's binary. So you think that it's a false dichotomy between founder mode and manager mode. You think there's a whole bunch of gray space in the middle, places where founders should absolutely be driving with a lot of conviction and opinions and not delegate critical aspects, particularly areas where there's customer facing impact are extremely critical for founders to take very close to own the vision, et cetera. And to also hire incredible people to be able to deliver something that it's impossible for you to micromanage, and you might not, it might not be the best use of your time or highest leverage use of your time to micromanage.
It is unlikely that it's ever the highest use of your time to micromanage, right? Like maybe there are rare edge cases where that is true because but even in those cases, it's usually because there was some sort of a gap prior to that moment. There wasn't clear enough communication. There wasn't enough information shared between the right parties. And so this person has to dive in and go do that micromanaging thing to make sure the thing gets across the line. But that's way more about the system not working as well as it could.
So if a founder is not getting the results that they want from, let's call it delegation, just to use a broad term, what do you think are the leading reasons that could be happening?
It's a great one. It's a great one. At Enjoy the Work, there's a story that we tell fairly regularly, mostly because it happens so frequently. My team's not moving fast enough. Product velocity is not where it needs to be. We don't have enough tests in place. Things are slipped right. That's the refrain, right? And we'll normally ask, do you think your people are lazy? Yes. And you're like, all right, we'll come back to that. Like default assumption that they're lazy. Not great logic in my mind, unless you've got like strong evidence, at which point you should have already fired them. So that's a separate conversation. You follow on and you're like, do you think they know what's most important for them to accomplish? Yes, absolutely. I said, all right, if I grabbed each of your people and put them in separate rooms and asked them to list explicitly what are the most important goals for the company, how we would measure success, and what are the specific tasks that each person in leadership is responsible for in order to deliver on that, do you think that they would all have the same answer? And over, you will find the founders start squirming in their chair a little bit. The emphatic yes is a, oh shit, right? Like maybe at best. And the reality is it's, if you're not operating with codified goals, if there is a ambiguous definition of success, if you don't have a list of explicit projects with a single owner attached to them, and you don't have rituals for collaboration, retrospectives, accountability, I think you're in deep shit. I just do. If you have those things, then the agency that people feel and actually are responsible for operating in is super clearly defined. I think one of my biggest lessons in the abstract journey is this idea of expectations versus agreements. And I expected all kinds of things of people, but it turns out I didn't say that out loud a lot of times. And then something would come back and you're like, oh man. And then I had to learn the hard lesson. Oh my God, I wasn't clear. I was not crisp enough with this person to allow them to say, yes, Josh, based on what you just said to me, I agree with what you're asking of me. I can do it by the deadline, and here's how we're going to measure the progress, blah, blah, blah. Those agreements become like how you supercharge your company. The expectations are how you end up handicapping everything. Because Mark, you can't read my mind. So far as I can tell. Maybe you've got some psychic abilities that I'm unaware
Unfortunately,
of.
no.
Right? But if I'm like, hey, all right, we need to ship this new feature that I just came up with. I wrote a little document. Go.
Yeah.
Like the level of like lack of clarity and not even like parameters for you to engage in leaves it all on you to somehow intuit all of what's going on in my brain. And if you can flip that as a founder and you begin to become more explicit about what you're asking for, you're empowering your people in a really profound way. They can say to me, hey, Josh, I can't hit that deadline. It's impossible with the resources I currently have and the backlog of other things that are prioritized. All right, what would it take in order for us to hit this deadline? If you gave me one more resource here, and if we could push this thing 3 weeks out, I can absolutely hit this deadline. Do you see how fucking powerful that is? There's deep clarity, deep alignment. And now we've talked about the things that are at risk and that could impact why this does or doesn't actually hit the goal that we've got in front of us. And when that's happening at the leadership level, and those leaders are then doing the same thing with their people, that's when I think you have like kind of founder mode really happening throughout your organization. There's a lot of people talk about autonomy. They want autonomy. I've never been a big fan of autonomy. I love agency because if you think about it, like if I've got one of my cells in my system is being autonomous, it's usually cancer. It's usually cancer, right? If it's acting in its own capacity to do the job that it was designed for, it has the agency is there, and the whole system then behaves in a healthy way.
Yeah, it's so true. Like I feel the role of the leader is a lot of times just being very clear about what you want and making sure that everyone understands that vision and that everyone's super clear of what success looks like. But I think, as you said, is easier said than done. And I think there's like almost two parts of it. Is like one of getting really good at being very explicit and clear. And then there's the other one of making sure that everyone is actually on the same page and I'm being really good at having a pulse on that. And I'm curious maybe what tactics have been really helpful to get really good at that.
One of the things that I think helped early on for us, and we did scale this beyond where I thought it was actually going to continue to work, and then it morphed. But very early on, and look, I will be totally honest with you. We designed what I'm about to tell you that we did in Slack. We designed it at Socialcast in 2008, and we called it Worklog. And it was this idea of just very short, like tweet length, just what am I doing right now? And it was like, you didn't do it all day long. That'd be bananas. But like when you're doing like sizable shifts in what you're doing. So maybe in the morning, I'm designing a new homepage. And then after lunch, I'm shifting gears and I'm actually going in to do some work on the billing and payment stuff. Right. And so I might drop a little work log in the morning and I'll drop one after. And it created ambient awareness. And what's interesting about that is suddenly you've got a sense of what the organization is doing at any given moment. Now, what they're doing doesn't always automatically translate to alignment, but oftentimes you can squint and be like, oh, the shape of the work that's happening right now is directionally going where we need it to go. Or you get the little flare that like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why that person is working on that thing right now. And so it just becomes a little signal. They're just little signals. So at Abstract, we had a channel called Worklog for the first 2 years. I think we kept using it until we had well over 30 or 40 people. Maybe, yeah, I think that's about right. And at that point, there's enough people doing enough different stuff that it started getting noisy. And then some groups carried it forward into their kind of departments. And so then a like subset of that happened. So it got harder, if I'm totally honest, it got harder to have that kind of level of almost like tactile feel.
But then we productized it, Josh, into the activity feed.
We
The
did.
product. And then you could just
100%.
look at your activity feed inside of the abstract product and see Jordan's working on he just committed a branch on this project, and Payam just committed a branch on this. Like it only applied to design. It didn't apply obviously to people that were not using the product as much, but like being able to see who's commenting on what, that I know that Wendy cares about something, or that Kevin cares about something, or Tom cares about something by watching what they're commenting on. We productized this thing that you're talking about. And I think 100%. It was so cool to build that ambient awareness. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I love that. And for those who don't know, Wendy was our CRO. And so when Wendy's in there asking questions, there's a specific lens, right, that shines on whatever's going on. Kevin is our CTO, right? If Kevin's weighing in, there's definitely another lens that gets applied to this. And I think that's one of the pieces is when your leadership is doing a decent job of cultivating that awareness within their own org, then they can share that up. And so that is something I've seen work well. I've also been places where that is a disaster because it's everybody put your stuff in Confluence and update your page, blah, blah. And that's way more like large enterprise organization problems, which are very real and like still have benefit. They just tend to get like you got 30,000 people in a company, it's going to be really difficult to do that. And so you end up laddering down into smaller subsections in order to try to get a sense of what's going on.
One more practical thing I think you did, Josh, when we worked together to calibrate, because I think one thing I heard in Mark's question, or at least the way I understood it, is like, how do you calibrate maybe what's happening in your head with what is happening in their head so that there's less of a gap or a delta between these two things? The symptom of there being a gap is essentially the work that moves forward is different in some key way, maybe than what you wanted it to be, or like the intention in the work is different. Like it's missing the point in a way. So one of the things that you did when we were working together is if you saw that some project that I was PMing was moving in a certain direction and it had deviated from what you were hoping it would do, you DM'd me and you were like, hey, like I saw this project's go in this direction. I can totally get on board with it, but I want you to hear me out on like the way I was thinking that this project would. I don't know if I even remember doing this, but I remember feeling like so invited. Like I felt very invited to just understand you, right? I didn't feel like you were trying to like shove your desired solution down the team's throat. I felt like you were just like, I want to be understood. I want to make sure that my voice is heard. So that's another thing you did that I think carried a lot of weight.
Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty cool to hear that. definitely never wanted it to come off as, no, it's Josh's way with anyone at all. I hoped, and I think you just gave me evidence of this. So I feel like you just gave me a huge gift. If I can create enough space for the two of us to come in and have a conversation about something, me coming in and creating openness, not judging the thing, not calling you out, you know what I mean? There's a lot of behaviors that would have shut you down. And I've seen, and honestly, I'm sure that I'm guilty of having done that as well. But in this moment and in this way, this was a thing that we were consciously trying to cultivate, is how do we invite one another in to a conversation, right?
And I think it was hard because I think you were trying to balance also, how do I make sure that the rest of the team is aware of my thinking and that the principles that are guiding what I'm about to say to Ben are available to other people. And then I think where this goes wrong is I think we've also had different flavors of this where you maybe say what you think almost too publicly at first without talking to me first. And I'm like, Josh, you just blew up the whole project. I haven't had a chance to even talk to you about it first, right? So I think it's a delicate balancing act that I don't think anyone's ever perfect at it, but I think I could watch you really do your best to try to get better at that.
And I appreciate you saying that. I think one of the other pieces for me that evolved in my tenure there was really this idea of writing as a way for me to process out, because I'm a verbal processor for sure. And I find tremendous value in that, especially if you're in a room with someone. I think the fidelity of conversation and connection is just insanely high. And for me as a leader, writing down the things that I was really thinking and finally having it basically stare back at me was insanely valuable. I could then be like, oh, interesting. Here's a thread between a bunch of different things. That, again, to your point, this is a principle that I'm intuitively operating off of. How can I make the implicit explicit? And for a leader, I think that's actually, I think, how you scale yourself. When you can start to deconstruct your own processing and bring that forward in a way that other people can engage with it and use it, I think that's really one of the key ways that you can scale yourself as a leader.
And let's say there's a leader that's listening to this as, yes, I want to do that. Like, how do you recommend picking up that habit? Is it more anytime you feel you're repeating yourself or there's uncertainty, or did you just have more of a recurring time, like every Friday?
Yeah.
Let me write about the thing that's top of mind for me that week.
One of the things that I was doing for a while was just my own journaling. If you are a founder and CEO of a hyper growth company, there is dozens of threads spinning at every moment, right? It's just like the amount of things that are going on is wild. And if you, honestly, it trickles down, right? I've been an IC that had, oh my God, there's 93 things I need to be on top of right now because there's just so much going on. So journaling as a practice was a thing I was doing for my own mental wellness. If I'm just being super candid, it was like, I want to go to sleep tonight. I need to get this shit out of my head onto a piece of paper where I can be like, cool, it's there. I can then come back to it, evaluate how much of this is true, how much of this is valuable, how much of this did I just need to get out. So that was like on one side of that journaling thing was really valuable. It then shifted and translated into something that I think any founder would benefit from, which is if you aren't sitting down and writing on a somewhat regular basis, it could be daily for 5 minutes. It could be once, you just mentioned, right? Friday, I block an hour and I will write what's going on. Kelly Watkins, who came in toward the end of the abstract experience, she is an incredible writer and marketer. And one of the things she would do was on Friday, she would write up kind of what was going on for her. And sometimes it had nothing to do with abstract. Sometimes it was like something she had read. I often did a similar thing, and I used that a lot of times to power some of the stuff that I was delivering in all hands. But for me, it's building a habit of reflective writing. Like, what happened this week? What was expected? What was unexpected? And now I'm reminded, this actually started a lot earlier for me in my career. I used to do this thing every morning. I would write down, what are the key things I have to do today? And then at the end of the day, right before I was going to close my laptop and go home, I would sit down and write out, what did I actually do today? And that delta began to illuminate all kinds of stuff. It was like, oh, this one project that isn't like actually high priority, even though a couple people think it's high priority, I'm not prioritizing it. I got pulled into this, and these are way bigger fires that I needed to tackle. What's going on and that makes it higher than this? And so like I could begin to understand, where do I think I need to put my time and where am I actually putting my time? And so that ends up that built a really helpful habit for me in being reflective about where my energy was going and being honest with myself. Like, I think that's the other piece. There are definitely a handful of documents I can think of in the time that I was at Abstract. There's one in particular I'm thinking of that no one ever read, but it was like late at night, just I had to get everything out. Awesome, positive things, some really not great things I was thinking and feeling, all of it. And I remember the next morning coming back to it and reading it and being like, okay, we can't tell anybody half of this because they would freak out. About a quarter of this is actually really useful and you need to do something about. The rest of it is you panicking. Like, how about we dial down that? And I could look at it objectively, right? And be like, okay, this chunk of stuff, we absolutely have to go deal with this. This chunk, this is just my monkey brain operating out of caffeine and anxiety, basically. And so those types of habits, rituals, I think are incredibly valuable. If you want to extrapolate it out, I also think that cultures like Amazon, which are like deeply writing oriented first, like first and foremost, you're writing and you're reading, and then you're going to talk about it. I have not been in a like that deep of that kind of a culture. And yet I know a number of folks who have said, wow, it fundamentally changes the way that you think about communicating and the way that you prioritize what you actually put in front of other people. That's my long ass way of saying, like, building a habit, being super reflective. And then if you really want to operationalize it, getting really crisp about what that looks like. So it could be as simple as, hey, no meetings happen until a document exists. These things are set up in it and everyone has had time to pre-read it. I'm just making that up, but like you could institutionalize something like that and then test it. That's the other piece is, again, your company's a product, right? Did this work? Did this actually get us closer to that kind of overarching awareness and being on the same page? Or did we diverge from here?
One thing I want to add before we wrap is just like a piggyback on that, because first of all, I saw you do all the stuff that you're talking about, Josh, and I think you then continued to bring the level of open communication to our team offsites, which people that are listening might not know, but Abstract was doing remote before the whole world went remote. So we were all distributed and we got together in person and we got in a big room and Josh and Kevin got in front of us and did like mom and dad sitting down and doing a fireside chat for the whole company. And like you guys crushed it. And I think it helped the whole company get into your head. But just one thing I want to add for founders that might be listening or for leaders that are listening is that I think I remember Josh giving you this feedback at one point that while you wanted to be an equal kind of horizontal peer to the people you hired and you don't believe in these kind of vertical relationships, which is one of the things I love about you, I told you that you could say anything and it will carry more weight because you're the CEO. And that is a powerful sword that I think a lot of founders don't realize they're holding. So one thing I want people to understand is you could say anything to your team and it will just carry more weight than if you don't. And now if you know that and you've hired adults, which is one of the things we've talked about, which are people that are high agency, responsible individuals, they can handle challenging information. Then if you just share what's on your mind with them, which is let's say the 25% of that document that you think is helpful for people to understand, and you just give the team a constant drip, maybe once a week. Yep. When I was at Facebook, even at 50,000 employees, Zuck still spent 15 minutes every Thursday telling the whole company like what's top of mind for him live, right? Like he still kept that practice going after 16, 17 years. I think there's no excuse as a founder to not share with your team what's top of mind for you. And as an employee in multiple environments, whenever you get any communication from the founder, if it's an email that's like top of mind at the end of the week, like here's what I'm thinking about, that stuff is so helpful to just get in the head of the founder. So if anyone's listening and they're like, I have to write this like big document and I have to spend all this, I have to spend an hour a week crafting this perfectly well worded whatever message to the team. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about just like a raw, here's how I'm feeling as like a dude right now or a woman.
Yep.
Like, right, here's what's top of mind for me as a leader of this company. I trust that you can all like handle this, and the context can help you make better decisions on a daily basis. And if you want to talk more about that stuff, just come to me. And I think you did a good job of kind of, again, no one's perfect, but I think you really did try to embody the spirit of creating that space. And I want to thank you for doing that.
Oh man, that's my privilege. And I do want to just piggyback on that. I distinctly remember you giving me that feedback about the weight of my words. And it was a really impactful moment for me, exactly for what you said. I don't ever want to roll into a conversation or relationship assuming power and positionality. That's actually something I've worked really hard in my life to counter. And it is also simultaneously true that due to the structure and responsibility of the way things are set up and the power dynamics, that whether I wanted that to be true or not, it was true. And so if I came in and was like, ooh, we shouldn't do that, we should do this, that's me rolling in, being a partner, being a collaborator, right? And what I'm expecting back is, I don't know, Josh, the reason we should do this is da 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 da. That's interesting. Can you unpack that for, right? But what I was not aware of is no matter how much I want that to be true, I'm still the CEO at the end of the day. And other people's projection of what weight that carries, and every person's different, it was real. And so it caused me to be, I was going to say a little bit more, I would say definitely at least a little bit more aware in those situations. And so I began to pay attention to what I was saying and how I was saying it. I definitely shifted in some moments to finding ways to deliver stuff through others sometimes when I understood some of those power dynamics. And at the end of the day, I love the point that you're really trying to make, which is we're humans. We deeply crave connection, belonging, right? Maybe you find that at work, maybe you don't, but I think that most of us really hope that we can find some of that in our work experience, like enough to make it like to get through things. And if there's a surplus, sometimes that's the energy that actually carries you through the really hard shit. And so as a leader, I love what you said, Ben. It's like, it isn't about crafting the perfect story. In fact, it's the inverse. It's about as being as real as you can be, understanding what you say matters. And it was, as you were telling that story, one thing that popped into my mind is one of the ways that I was combating that at one point was I would go for walks. That was one of my key things as when I was in that role, was like, wow, turns out if I'm hiking, I have tremendous clarity. You could ask almost anybody that was around me during that time. It was like, I'd come back from a really long hike and be like, oh my God, I know what we need to do. Shit just got super clear. And so then I would start doing 1-minute videos of me walking and just telling the team, hey, everybody, because we were remote. Like at the very end, we were all remote after the pandemic. But before that, 2018, 2019, we were 70, 80% remote. And so in order to keep that culture connected, it didn't require, but I think one of the things that I did that was beneficial was to just show up in that way. It was little things. It was just like, I'm out for a walk, which subtly implies you too could go for a walk, right? Like it's these little things. We're always communicating, right? You're never not communicating. And as a founder or a leader, and I love that you called that out too, because this isn't just founder material. This is like anyone who's leading other folks or in a role where you are responsible for others and for the direction of things. Like, I think all of this stuff applies deeply.
It's so funny as you were sharing that feedback that Ben gave you. I was like, oh, I've definitely had the exact same problem happen in other organizations. The same thing, like for example, at Asana, when we had like product reviews with the co-founder, the same thing happened. You get all this feedback, you're like, oh shit, maybe I need to change everything and we cannot ship it and the launch is completely blocked. But at the same time, it was helpful for them to be super honest and unfiltered. And then we ended up landing with this framework where at the end of the meeting, we'll process all the feedback and label it into 3 things together. Here are the things that you should do. As a founder, I feel very strongly about this. These are the things that you should try. Like I have a hunch that there's something here. I think we need to both figure out or These are things that I'm just shooting from the hip, crazy ideas, consider it, but don't do it. And I think that just made those meetings a lot more fun for everyone, not only just the founder, but also the people, because you're like, okay, like I can actually listen to their feedback without being stressed that, oh shit, this is going to derail my month, my week, my day. But yeah, maybe now shifting gears a bit. I know, Josh, you've been thinking probably a good amount of the intersection between design and AI. I'd love to see where your head is at in that big topic.
Yeah, that is a big topic. So it's interesting. I haven't been a practicing designer in a while. Still end up designing stuff. And I'm not in the seat pushing pixels every day, is I guess what I'm trying to say. But even from where I'm at, God, Ben, I don't know, going back to when we were working on some stuff, there were things that we were eyeballing that the LLMs just weren't there yet for us to be able to start doing some of the things that we wanted to do. But we had some pretty big ideas about what would be possible with the data set that we were sitting on top of and what we could start opening up for folks. And I can't speak for everybody, but I would be surprised if any designer out there, and especially folks who are leading design teams, are looking at AI as a way to replace their designers.
And that's a slippery slope if they are.
Well, thank you, because my next statement was going to be, I actually think there are a lot of executives who are absolutely thinking that. And that is probably, if I'm talking about anything that makes me nervous right now for design as an industry, it is that in the last decade, we did a pretty okay job of, I think, demonstrating why design is valuable. And yet we still, I don't think, really unlocked the business value of design. There's still a gap. Not enough CEOs deeply believe and understand why design is such a critical and valuable element. And I think there are a lot of executives who absolutely would much rather have robots do design than humans. Because designers are human. They're picky and messy and have opinions on things. Lots of them. And
Josh, if I had to describe where I think if a product has a heart, and I know it doesn't because it's a piece of software, but if a product had a heart, I think that the design function is probably the place that it's the closest place that I could describe as where like the heart of the product really lives. And I think if you think your product needs to have a heart and it needs to have something about it that makes it glow in some way, we talked to Heather about making products sing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's design. And I think if you could, like, if you do believe as a person that AI is going to get to the point where you want to let AI create the heart or like the DNA of your product, then go explore that and see where it takes you. I'll be curious. It's an experiment someone should run, but I don't know if I would want to be the CEO of the company that runs that experiment.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm with you, Ben. I feel like actually like my take is, the more I think about it, is that design will be one of the last jobs that I would want to replace. I feel as with AI, it's going to become easier and easier to build software. And I think because of that, spaces are going to get more crowded. There's going to be more products doing the same thing. And I think then at that point, what differentiates product A from product B? I think has to be design, right? Someone who's thinking about the problem more creatively. And I think we're seeing that. I think that's a hypothesis that has come up in the podcast many times, like with Linear as a good example, like work management. Crowded space, but on why is Linear doing well? Because they have a really strong design. They thought it from first principles, and it's in their DNA of their company. And
they have an opinion. Like that I think is one of the things that's really been more and more interesting to me as time has gone on, is the software that is most opinionated seems to be the things that create the most loyalty, the most like heart connection, to use your language, Ben. And I think design is critical in that. I will also give a shout out to the engineering folks and to some of the PM folks out there, because I have worked with some engineers who I think are as instrumental in creating that heart because they care. As a designer.
Tom Moore is a great example, I think, of one of those engineers. Yeah.
I was privileged to work with a number of folks like that at Twitter. Some of the folks on the mobile team and some of the back-end engineers, which is in my mind when I say it out loud, like a back-end engineer creating heart, but you're like, no, this person deeply cares about the experience in a way that they're sweating the details. They're actually working harder and staying up later and pushing to make sure that thing is done right. And I think that energy,
if a loading operation can take a split second instead of 3 or 4 seconds, that certainly makes the product feel different. And there's nothing the designer can do about that.
Nope.
And there might not be anything the front end engineer can do about that either. That might be entirely back end breakthrough. So
totally.
if your engineer cares about that, it's going to pay off.
Yeah. And so that's, to me, that's like cultivating a sense of shared responsibility for the product experience. And I think design can lead that. I really do. And I think the engineers I'm thinking of, they were the ones that loved partnering with us and we loved partnering with them, right? Like it was a mutually beneficial relationship, if you will. Like we all wanted the best for our customers or our users that were using the service. One of the other things about this whole design and AI thing is I'm a little nervous because I think a lot of folks who are more mature in their career, who've seen a lot of shit, had the benefit of some level of apprenticeship culture, and not like explicitly apprenticeship, but like a lot of us studied other people who were doing interesting shit, or we sat alongside them and we really benefited from the wisdom and experience of some more seasoned folks. And I'm a little nervous that the younger or earlier in their career designers right now are probably the most at risk of AI taking some of that work. And it bums me out because that's how you get good, is you got to put the reps in. I do not think that you become a great designer overnight. I have no evidence to support that. All the evidence I have is that it is time and honestly, like repetition, right? You're in there, you're doing things, it doesn't quite work, you're figuring out why it's not working, you're studying the principles that inform user experience design, branding, like all the different pieces, and you just have to keep practicing it. And so if AI comes in and automates out a bunch of that kind of early career-ish work, I think then like design careers start changing. If I have a positive spin on that, it's okay. Maybe what we're about to see is design shifting into like more of a creative director role as like almost the kind of like core definition, right? If you have built an agentic type of workflow where you've got 2 or 3 or 4 different agents that can go and analyze user testing results and can look at the documentation for the feature and can also study existing solutions to something like this, then at the end of the day, your job starts shifting into how to take those things that come back to you and then direct it into something interesting and creative. I've talked to a handful of designers recently that one of the things I just says, look, everywhere you can reach for Anthropic or chat, whatever your favorite LLM du jour, why don't you try it? If you would normally sit down and just start designing, okay, maybe don't do that. Maybe sit down and have it ask you questions. Validate your assumptions on the thing you're about to tackle. Find as many ways to use the technology to your benefit as you possibly can. Like automating multiple options for laying out a home feed on an iOS app. Okay, cool. Actually understanding the problem that you're solving and the job that needs to be done in order for the thing to convert and for either the customer to get what they need or for the service to actually provide the benefit, that's your job. Like the pixel pushing is just one aspect of manifesting that thing out. And so I think AI can actually be way more involved in the design process in a bunch of ways that have nothing to do with the tool of Pixel, like Figma or whatever it is that you use. But I hear a lot of people panicking about like when Figma launched that feature and then pulled that shit back because there were reasons. There were lots of reasons. There always are. But the backlash I thought was really interesting. People weren't quite ready for that in that way. And I think we as an industry hadn't even had the conversation. Is this what we want? Right? Is this what we want? Is this the way we want this to manifest? I don't know. Maybe not. And thank you, Dylan, for taking a shot, like, and taking the risk to put it out. Because I don't know that we all as an industry would have the sensitivity or even language to start talking about this had something like that not like really shown up in everybody's face.
If I'm designing, I think the example was I can tell Figma to design like a weather app for me.
Right.
And then the weather app that it designs pretty much looks exactly like a bunch of other weather apps. And it's inspired by them because it has to get trained somehow. So now the conversation became, if I'm designing something on Figma, does that mean that my designs can now be used as inputs into someone else's prompt into the system? Whereas I would ideally like to retain all of my design as like intellectual property that won't be used. So I think that conversation wouldn't be happening probably if we didn't see such a big demo, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't know, this might be a little controversial. In a lot of ways, okay, you run a design agency and your client comes to you and says, we've got an idea for an amazing weather app. It's gonna do all the stuff that you would expect in this other one, but we also have this really cool, I'm making so much shit up right now. We have like local weather people who are just random people who decide they want to do the weather on our app. Okay, if you're the designer tasked with that, I can tell you pretty quickly what apps you're going to go look at, what patterns you're already studying. You're going to look at, okay, TikTok, it does full screen video takeover, and they've got a bunch of the tools that are needed and right? And so as a designer, you are going out and you're looking at all of the other shit that's out there, and you are taking inspiration. You're looking at patterns, because at the end of the day, if these patterns work at scale in the millions to hundreds of millions of people, why am I doing something different? The answer to that might be because the different is what sets us apart. And so that's it. But that's a design decision. I'm consciously choosing to not follow a trend because I want to create a different experience that I believe will lead to the outcome that we're looking for. I've also seen a lot of companies do that and end up completely flopping and then reverting back to whatever the core established pattern is right now, right? And we as humans are doing all that stuff. But now we're super freaked out when an AI can do it in,
I think it's just about the explicitness of the permission. Because at Abstract, we talked a lot about open design, right? Like that was one of the big things we want to do, is just like you could go and have open code bases, like open source code in GitHub or something. Like, why shouldn't we open source design for sketch files or abstract files or something like that? So I'm a believer in the concept. I think the thing I just want to make sure is that no one unintentionally contributes their Legos to the collective Lego kit.
100%. And that, I think, was some of the response was that I think it was default opt-in, not a choice to opt in. And I think that's a hard lesson for any company to learn is, okay, you've got human beings who feel very strongly about things. Giving them the ability to opt into something is relationally a really healthy thing to do. Forcing them to opt out, you burn some of that relational equity that you've built and trust. Yeah. So I agree with you, Ben. And there's a wild difference between like open source anything, right? Hey, we open sourced, here's a great one, login screens. Do we really need to be like wildly innovative on login screens? I don't know. Maybe for your company and the brand that you're building, the answer is yes. But I'd argue for like the vast majority of people on the planet, the clearer and simpler that shit is, and the more consistent it is across things, the better for everyone.
Like a reset password flow or stuff like that.
Correct. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of patterns that are really valuable, and society, all the people using this technology end up benefiting from some of these patterns, right? Your point of the intellectual property that's taking those patterns and then creating new things with them, that is a slippery slope. And I think most large corporations aren't going to opt into shit like that, right? Like that data is proprietary. I know that for a fact because of the stuff we had to go through around compliance when people were storing all their design IP in our cloud servers, right? Like the Microsofts and of the world were like,
Figma files these days are probably the closest thing that you can get to knowing what a company's planning to do.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. So it is even more important to keep that within your own walls, if you will.
One question that I really enjoy thinking about is, in 10 years, when I say I did this thing, what would people think it was crazy? And an example that I like to think about is like that we were driving ourselves around and how unsafe that was. I'm curious if I ask the question of like, in 10 years, what do you think something that would be crazy that designers did today? What do you think that?
Oh, God. Willingly create the social media problem that we now live with? No, I'm kidding. I'm being cheeky.
I'm with you.
I'm being super cheeky.
I'll just go first, Josh.
Nice. Thank you.
One of the crazy things to me is that we'll look back and think it was wild that designers used to spend hours and hours wiring up Figma prototypes to cover every freaking button in a prototype so that if someone clicks through it, they cannot possibly hit a dead end.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's one of the biggest time wastes in all of product
Mm.
design is like high fidelity prototyping. Josh, and that might be a hot take, but I've
Oh,
seen
man,
so much time wasted on this.
So I have very polarizing responses to that. One is I have created incredibly high fidelity prototypes that were essential in communicating and clarifying what exactly the experience needed to be. And had I not done that, I am not confident that like it would have translated. Like there would have been a tremendous amount of work downstream to like course correct and fix. So like I can make a case for that. At the same time, I think this is one of those things where it's if you used words and wrote out a like basic diagram and flow of how this thing should operate, I want AI to go in and be like, oh, cool, we know what you need to do. And we wired it. That's a great use of AI, right? Hey, here are my screens, wire this together, and then let me fiddle with the last like 5%. Anyway,
Yeah, if I use a button component and then that screen has an arrow that just goes to this other screen, then you could assume that either this button goes back or it goes forward, but it pops up something. But like having to wire up all those edge cases, I don't know. I feel like that's going to get automated out.
And I hope so. I hope to God, because if you open someone else's Figma file and go into prototype mode and the just spaghetti just kills me. So there are going to be some origami people out there who will violently disagree with what I'm about to say. But I think noodle-based interface design is bananas. I can't even fathom for the life of me why that's a way that we would do things. I do know why, and I have used them enough to understand it, but it is a learning curve that makes things like way more complex in my mind than needs to be. If I was going to, though, make a statement on 10 years from now, maybe the thing I'm going to say is that designers did not spend enough time understanding the business that they were in. So, and I'll unpack that. If you don't understand the business that your company is in, what does it do? How does it sell? What is the go-to-market motion? How do you fucking make money? Which down the stream is like, how do you get paid? You get paid because a bunch of things end up being true and the product does what it's purported to do and the people using it get benefit out of it. But if designers don't understand the business, how the business operates, how we charge for things, like the disconnect between that and the like desire to just focus on the user experience is one of the things that I think is a giant gap. I just think it's one of the biggest gaps that there is in the design field right now. And I've said this multiple times. It's if you really want to level up as a designer right now, spend some spare cycles like just understanding basic business models, understand go-to-market motions. You might actually have some insights that can unlock a new motion. But if you don't understand that, you can't participate and no one's going to take you seriously. And then I say all of that because at the end of the day, I think to your point, Ben, earlier about design being that heartbeat, I think the other thing that I've believed and I hope will continue to be true is design as the representative of the user. Like the one voice inside of this organism or organization, right? That is, if we're all really honest, the goal is to operationally maximize our efficiency in making money, which is a really not human, lacking heart statement to make, but it's true. That's the context in which we operate in these businesses. Cool. All right. So how can I bring the experience for that human being on the other side of this into connection with the needs of what this business it has in order to sustain itself and continue to serve that person? And if as a designer, I can hold that tension, I think there is so much power. I think there is opportunity career-wise. And I actually think that at the end of the day, the designers who can hold those two things are the ones who end up shaping the future. And so that's probably my thing. If I look back 10 years from now, I think we will be shocked at how little design understood and engaged in the actual business.
There's nothing more compelling to me than a designer coming forward excited about a new idea or a new design that immediately moves the needle on something that matters for the business. There's nothing that has more like tailwinds behind it that I've seen is like a design that like just is going to hit the mark on what the business cares about is it's just going to move forward and fly. Like everyone wants it. So thanks for sharing that, Josh. You've been really generous with your time, so we don't want to go much longer. First of all, huge thank you for joining us. It's been awesome to just reconnect and get your thoughts on these things, and I think our audience is going to love this conversation. The two questions that we just want to ask you before we let you go is, first one, if people want to follow more of what you're thinking about, what's on your mind, where can they follow you? And then the second question is, how can folks potentially be helpful to you?
Ooh, I still have an account on Twitter. I refuse to call it by its false name, although I'm like every passing day very seriously thinking about migrating off of that, but I'm still there for now, and that's at least a way. I'm Jay Brewer on Twitter, Instagram, Threads. I've been a little bit more active on Threads, and I actually have a goal of starting to engage a little bit more over there. So people can feel free to say hi that way. If you really want to get a hold of me directly, check out my website. There are ways for you to contact me. And I occasionally post stuff on LinkedIn, but I don't know. It's weird. Watching LinkedIn become a social network is weird. As far as folks can help me, man, I don't know. I really love connecting people and ideas. It's something that I have finally figured out. That's my jam. And so if folks are building something new and they are looking for someone to potentially give feedback or make connections, I feel really fortunate. I've got a great network of folks that I'm connected with. I don't always have all the time in the world, but I do try to make myself available to folks for feedback. I do coaching and mentorship. And if there are really interesting companies that you think that I'm a good fit for, I'm always down to have a conversation. And beyond that, I don't know, maybe just if any of this stuff resonates, let me know. That'd be super cool. It'd be fun to hear from people if any of this lands for them. And then if they apply it, what the experience is. I'm always interested in how we can improve the way that we show up for each other personally and professionally.
And people should go and check out Enjoy the Work too and see what you guys are up to there.
100%. A partnership of former founders and CEOs, each with their own kind of superpowers. I joke about it being like the Avengers for startups. And this group of people are incredibly talented and have made it their mission to really teach and help enable the next wave of entrepreneurs to be the best leaders that they can be. And so there's very tactical, practical skills, there's interpersonal things, but it's a really, in my opinion, very well-rounded, holistic practice. And the companies that we work with, I think, would say the same.
Josh, thanks so much for joining us. Wishing you all the best in this next chapter, this next phase of your career. I love hearing what you're up to now, and hopefully we'll have you back on for part 2 down the road.
Awesome. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.